All right, everyone. Welcome to session IC80, 10 Things I Hate About You, Exploring Roles and Responsibilities of Team Members in a Seating Clinic. My name is Vince, and I'll be moderating today's session, and will provide the CU code at the end in the chat, but also I'll log back in and announce it over the video as well, but just know that it is in there. Before we get started, please remember to mute yourself. Questions can be asked using the chat feature. I'll go ahead and address those at the end of the session and relay those over the presenters. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lisa Cordero and Linda Bollinger.
Hello, everyone, and good evening from New York, and welcome to 10 Things I Hate About You. I was reminded that that's a 90s movie, which kind of dates us, but exploring the relationships, roles, and responsibilities of the Seating and Mobility Clinic. My name is Linda Bollinger. I'm a physical therapist, and recently I'm currently working for Sunrise Medical as their pediatric sales specialist. And prior to that, I did run a seating and mobility clinic on Long Island, which for about 15, 20 years at a local UCP on Long Island. And that's where I got to meet my colleague who's also presenting with us today. And her name is Lisa Cordero, and she'll give you a little background on herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am also a physical therapist by background, and I am a practicing ATP for the last 21 years. And I work for Home Medical Equipment, which is a subsidiary of National Seating and Mobility here in New York. I service markets in the New York metropolitan area and on Long Island. So we are excited that you joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And I hope that the title drew you in. Just a little content disclosure, both Lisa and I did create this seminar specifically for ISS. And although we both have I do work for a manufacturer, I don't intend to endorse any particular model, band, or product or manufacturer. And for the most part, we're really not discussing product at all, but it just in case it should come up. And our objectives for today, upon completion of this presentation, I hope that you'll be able to describe the members of the Seating and Mobility team, identify 3 obstacles to running an effective seating and mobility clinic, and design or modify a seating and mobility program.
So our schedule today for our movie marathon, I hope that all of you are set up with your popcorn, your chocolate snack of choice, and your afternoon caffeine. The movies that are in the docket for our marathon today are The Devil Wears Prada, where we will discuss challenging work environments, 10 Things I Hate About You, which is challenges with working with other professionals. One of my all-time favorites, When Harry Met Sally, how to create a friendship and a working relationship. Another all-time favorite, Where We Help Each Other, with Jerry Maguire. We're going to talk about a team approach and the love story of a wheelchair clinic. And lastly, we're going to close it out with a marriage story, which is where we're just going to kind of wrap things up and answer some questions for everyone.
So let's get started. So just a little bit of The Devil Wears Prada, the challenging work environment. We thought we'd give a little background on ourselves and how we came to working in this environment, in this industry. For myself, I graduated in 1987 from LIU Brooklyn with an MS in PT. I had very little education in seating. I think I remember sitting in a wheelchair and pushing it, basically. I began working in 1990 for a school with developmental disabilities, and I worked with an OT who wanted to work with a therapist who knew about the pelvis. And so that was me. That sparked my interest in seating mobility. I really enjoyed seeing like the fruits of my efforts, like compared to traditional therapy. And way back in the 90s, when our individuals were living in group homes, many didn't have like access to really wheelchair clinics. They relied on their staff to bring them to the local supplier maybe. I remember social workers were often in charge of the recommendations. And then in like the late 90s, 1988, UCP started this wheelchair clinic and brought me on board. And I tried to develop this clinic using what I knew to be RESNA guidelines at the time. It was unique because the individuals there were so dependent, and they were often like at the mercy of the dealers who may or may not have good experience with them. And the clinic developed to be like for evaluations. I wound up having like a loaner equipment library. It got pressure mapping early on, and the needs of the individual really became a top priority. Funding, even back then, very difficult. For me, one of my biggest struggles was the turnaround time for my documentation, submitting for justification. I always had more orders. I didn't have a lot of support or a lot of support staff, and it took me a lot of time to get those orders in. It was very frustrating a lot of times because people just thought of, oh, so you order a wheelchair. And so I had to educate my administration and really kind of prove myself with the successful outcomes. Hold on, sorry guys. There we go.
So my background as a physical therapist, I graduated PT school, BS in PT in 1996, and I had a New York State Health Corps grant, which allowed me to have financial assistance in paying for my education, but in return, I had to do 36 months of work in a nonprofit agency. And I also ended up at a very small UCP where we treated adults to peds, mostly developmental disabilities, but we did do some neuro rehab. And I worked with a CODA who kind of took me under his wing. We used to make the tri-wall, I don't know, I'm dating myself here, but a lot of you might remember like the tri-wall inserts for children's high chairs, or we made tri-wall standards for early intervention. And he really was instrumental in sparking my interest in learning about, how to measure and use the tools and make the adjustments. And then I also worked with a really great supplier who took me under his wing as well. And it taught me a lot about seating and mobility. The joke for me amongst my group of PT friends is that I missed the one day of wheelchair lecture that we had in school. We had one day, I was out sick, and now it's my profession. So never say never. I also really enjoy the therapeutic side, but also the technical side of how we make something work for a client and to see another means of them achieving their goals. Like I said earlier on, I've been doing this for 21 years now. I leapt to the dark side, as people often refer to it, in 2001. And I've never looked back. Well, I've looked back, but I'm still going ahead to the current environment we're in. And for me, it can be challenging because I'm a physical therapist by background, but I'm not the treating therapist in the clinic situation. The LCMPs that I'm working with are, and so that can be a challenge for me in this process.
So from my perspective, the reason why this was such a challenging work environment for me was like for the clients that I had that had developmental disabilities, a lot of times they had very poor history. So it was hard to do intakes. The families may or may not be involved. A lot of them my clients came with staff who didn't really know them very well. There was constantly changing staff. The multiple diagnoses and which one was most important. Transportation was always an issue. They came by van, the van was broken. They came by medical transportation, and that didn't show up. I had a high percentage of no-shows. And so it was very difficult to get carryover that way. There was also a lot of caregivers, in these group home settings. I did also see individuals with acquired disabilities, and some of the challenges there were just for the individual. Sometimes this was their first wheelchair, and so acceptance was sometimes an issue. Also, because I was called UCP, sometimes we were not well known in the area, especially for individuals with acquired disabilities. So my clients had worked with other suppliers without a clinician. Funding is always a challenge. With this was mostly commercial insurance, where maybe with my developmental disability clients, it was more Medicaid. The resistance to recommending, if they had been in a wheelchair, they don't want to change what they're doing and go with something that maybe they weren't used to. And also, if I had someone with a progressive diagnosis, of course, that was just emotionally, I think, difficult for the process.
So from the RTS perspective, if we break it down to developmental disabled clients versus acquired disabilities, with the developmentally disabled population, a lot of issues where these clients are extremely tough on their chairs. They are frequently broken. We're constantly repairing them. And as we all know, there's frequency limitations on what we can, how often we can repair something. So sometimes the chairs are broken more than the funding source allows us to repair them. You know, we've got issues where things may not be covered by insurance, but they're still medically required. They can be difficult to provide. We get down coded, and the group homes may not be able to pay for those items. We can at times have difficulty getting things approved, you know, a custom support or an adaptation we used to make. You know, again, funding has always been difficult, but 15 or 20 years ago, it was much easier to kind of create and justify these custom supports for the developmentally disabled population and not be told that's just the reimbursement for a standard arm trough or something like that. So that's definitely, you know, a challenge in this situation. Getting paperwork, as always, for repairs. We were all in a bunch of us were in a session earlier where we were talking about documentation requirements and things like that, and the fact that just getting documentation to get something repaired can take too long. And from the business side of things, it's costly to maintain these chairs for people in the developmentally disabled world. They're very tough on their chairs, Medicare, Medicaid. A lot of times we're dealing with 13-month rentals where we're responsible for those repairs. So, you know, business-wise, in terms of being able to keep the lights on, it definitely can be more of a challenge. When we shift and talk about patients with acquired disabilities, again, very similar to some of the challenges that Linda spoke about, getting the patient to acknowledge the progression of their disease, but also getting the insurance company to recognize the change in their progression. Where there may not be a change in diagnosis, there's a change in their functional status, and are we able to get something funded for them? You know, always looking at the outdoor versus in-home mobility guidelines for someone who may have a disease that's progressing rather quickly, and understanding that progression and figuring out how to plan accordingly for it. Looking at their current functional status, their progression, and a lot of times, you know, the infamous 5-year rule, again, it can make it difficult for getting things funded for some of these patients right now.
So the next movie that we want to talk about, and this is really what sparked our the 10 Things I Hate About You. And this is really the crux of our presentation. What we came up with at the last ISS was that we worked together for 15 plus years, and we still liked one another. But, you know, sometimes it's difficult working with someone with in this environment. So what my perspective of working with an RTS is that in the 1990s, when we started this, it was even hard to determine who was qualified. You know, we could have someone come from the local drugstore to write an order up. I think that the ATP exam gave some level of weeding out that, and so that's been helpful. But at the time, it was sometimes super frustrating. You know, in my clinic, we work with different suppliers on different days, and so you had to know this. You have to know the skill set of the person that you're working with. Follow-up is always critical, but what is their knowledge of the product? What is their skill? Are they good technically but not clinically, or vice versa? And how we approach the process is often dependent upon that working with the supplier. You need to be able to spend long periods of time together in a stressful situation. And when you're seeing patient back to back and making productivity, but you're trying to get some things done, and you're with this person for a long period of time. And for us, it was on a weekly basis. And so it was really important that we could get along. What happens when you disagree? And sometimes you don't always agree with the person, and your recommendations aren't the same. So you have to be able to be honest. You have to not be nasty, especially, and be kind during these situations. And, we all talk about deadlines. What happens when the supplier doesn't meet your required deadline? that used to be super frustrating for me, is that I'm waiting for the specs, or I'm waiting for the delivery, or what's going on here? Did you submit? So what happens with that? And so that's one of the frustrating things. What happens when you like the supplier, you like your RTS who comes in there, but their company is a nightmare, or their customer service is a nightmare? That continues to make that relationship challenging. And also, it's where as a clinician, that's what I'm about. And so, that feeling that, or frustration, if the supplier is like, I just want to get this sale, and you're like, but I want this clinically. How do I do that? And so sometimes I think the supplier is the bad guy and saying that's not covered item. And I'm like, and you become frustrated by that. So those are some of the things with these challenges with working with my supplier.
So for me, again, whether it's a 15-year working relationship or a new working relationship, the challenges exist and how you're going to work through them. So for me, with my clinical background, it can, for me personally, sometimes be difficult to take that step back and not take the lead in that clinical aspect when I'm not there to be that person. It can be challenging, and especially now, and not challenging in a negative way, but it's challenging with the way that the funding guidelines change, and if a clinician is not familiar with them, and not necessarily even the therapist, but a lot of times the doctors aren't as aware, and so they're saying, I want X, Y, and Z, and you're trying to explain to them why that's not going to work because they don't have a group, a neurological diagnosis. And if that person doesn't understand the funding guidelines or refuses to hear the conversation about the funding guidelines, that can be extremely frustrating. Also, not understanding what we're dealing with in terms of reimbursement. We work very hard, and Linda and I for years worked very hard to make compromises on things. That if all things being equal, on this chair we would do X because clinically and medically it gave us the same outcome, but we had a little bit of a different setup in terms of being able to possibly do something that was maybe a more costly item on the chair, that sort of thing. So understanding what can be supplied to the patient. The good guy, bad guy, a lot of times the RTS is painted as the bad guy. Well, I can't do it because they won't let me. They won't supply that. And so that can be very frustrating, especially if that's not the mindset you come into the clinic with as the RTS. And lastly, and it kind of comes and goes in waves with things, but it can be very difficult when you may be working with a clinician who may not be proficient or quick on their paperwork and their documentation, and the patient is calling you asking for an update on the status, or where are we at with the order, and you want to be honest with that patient, but you also don't want to throw your clinician under the bus. So having an understanding of how they work, what their timeline is like, the things that may be affecting their documentation time, that can be a challenge, but it's something you need to understand in order to communicate properly. So how did we work to overcome some of these challenges? And that's part of what over time I think evolves with the clinician and the ATP that you're working with. We work very hard to understand and have an environment of honesty, and we would compromise on things. We would have conversations about what we were recommending, what we were thinking, and understanding I wanted A, maybe Linda wanted B, and how are we going to compromise on that situation? It's important to get, oh guys, I see the crackling. I'm sorry.
We're good.
To agree on some of the approaches to your seating and how you approach your clients, what your personal biases are to how you approach someone, and then establishing your role as in the evaluation process, in the delivery process, and also I work with another clinician. We've worked together for a very long time, and a lot of times therapists will say to us, you and Jenny, you've been doing this together a long time. You can tell by the way that the two of you interact with one another and how how the conversation just flows as you're problem solving. And a lot of times we also, I think over time you learn to talk without speaking, just kind of knowing. And then also talking about how you are going to establish your communication methods. A lot of us have access to my chart, or in our case, mynsmorder.com. I know other suppliers have their own version as well in regards to how information is going to be shared. You need to think about how you're going to get over those barriers to service, especially right now. Where are bottlenecks occurring? Is it occurring with getting quotes from the manufacturers? Is it from getting documentation from the therapist? Is the bottleneck in the process right now occurring from supply chain issues? So how together are you going to overcome some of that situation? And then also monitoring the outcomes. Where are those bottlenecks happening? How can we work to help smooth and streamline the process?
So our next movie is When Harry Met Sally, and that's basically creating that friendship and for us a working relationship. And one of the methods that we think allowed this to be a successful working relationship was having established roles and knowing what each of us was responsible to do. And as the LCMP, my role included doing the needs assessment, doing that hands-on assessment, both with subjective terms and objective measures, demoing the equipment, determining what equipment would meet the clinical needs for the seating mobility, and then using the recommendations of the supplier for the final recommendation. Understanding the funding so I could make the best recommendation. So while meeting the funding guidelines, providing the letter of medical necessity or the FME, ongoing follow-up. Sometimes my follow-up was what brought the clients back to us, and I was sometimes the eyes and ears that brought them to the supplier. I always felt as though I was responsible to advocate for the end user and their family and kind of act as a liaison between the supplier and the end user. So this really, I think, was some of the key points of my role as the LCMP.
So I don't know if that's any better. I will try to switch input devices.
Yes.
That's not any better.
It is.
Okay. So part of what my role as the RTS in this situation is that I need to support, educate, and provide guidance to the LCMPs on things like insurance guidelines and diagnosis qualifications and what we're seeing in regards to payer resources right now. I help with the evaluation in the clinic with measurements. I assist with a MAT evaluation if requested, or request to set up demo equipment. I also work a lot in conjunction with my funding specialist, the LCM clinic coordinator, to understand and explain insurance guidelines ahead of time so that we know what is happening and what may or may not be covered by a patient's insurance. I also make sure that we've performed a proper home evaluation. I act as the liaison between the clinic and the supplier support staff. So again, being a point person between possibly the LCMP or their clinic coordinator, our funding specialist, to help keep the communication moving, the paperwork flowing, that sort of thing. At the end of the process, I work to instruct and train the individual on the use of their equipment and also, fitting and adjusting. So in terms of that part of it, that would be my main role of things. And, this is where we talk about, we have our roles and how we kind of moved our process forward and got the clinic moving in a better direction. Like I said, Linda and I did not know one another when we started working together. It's, every day or every week, Mondays, 8 to 5, full days together, back to back. And you would go and sit at lunch and learn about one another and your families and what you did that weekend and what movies you watched, like we're talking about now, and how we kind of evolved all of our conversations. We were very aware of each other's seating philosophy and how we worked and our work ethic and how we were always, the same goal at the end of the day was the best outcome for the end user. And being able to have that sort of communication with one another, in addition to our professional relationship, just made it very easy to go back into clinic and for us to be able to have open communication when something was maybe happening that we might not have been in total agreement about. And it works for us to help to have that kind of communication, I think, with anybody you're working with, to work that way, because you're then providing, a unified approach to your client when you're working with them.
Yeah, and I think that as silly as it sounds, but being able to be at lunch and to take a step away from the clinic piece of it and have lunch together, and you gain a trust for one another. So we both knew that we were kind of we had the same goals. And so when things weren't maybe going so smoothly in the clinic, we still had one another's back. And so I think that really helped to make a good working relationship, and certainly friendship for 20 years. So just to talk a little bit about the team culture, Jerry Maguire, the team, help me help you. And isn't that what this is all about? And so this is what the team approach is about. Interprofessional teamwork is when different healthcare professionals with different diverse knowledge, skills, and talent combine their efforts to achieve a common goal. Teamwork is usually overseen by a team leader, and those within the team are kind of delegated individual tasks to complete and contribute to the end goal. The interprofessional collaboration, which is a little bit different, I think more like what we did, was defined as a process of communication and decision-making that enabled separate and shared knowledge and skills of healthcare providers to influence the client care. Collaborators usually do not have a leader, and they come up with their ideas and they make their decisions together for that common goal. And I would say that that's how we pretty much worked. However, there really is, although team leadership, generally it's non-hierarchical. Like I didn't report to Lisa, Lisa didn't report to me. A leader is often inevitable. And in your team, is that going to be the prescribing physician? Is it going to be the lead therapist? Is it the supplier? Because depending on the situation, it is that team leader might change. I think Lisa, you had some experience.
Yeah, I mean, I work. Right now I'm working with a couple of new therapists. They're new to seating and mobility clinic. They don't have a lot of experience, and one of the things that we talked about is, she asked me, like, I need you to kind of lead me through this. So right now I'm taking the lead role when we're seeing a patient, kind of walking her through the questions to ask, what should be on her evaluation. I may be familiar with a lot of the clients we're working with because I've been in the clinic for a very long time and have history with them. She is very new to it. And we talked about, setting up, this is how we want to work right now. And that if she has a question, to stop and ask me the questions. And as she gets more comfortable, there we go, moving back and forth in terms of, her coming forward and me stepping back. So that's part of kind of working through that team leadership also, is taking that step forward when you're asked to, and understanding the evolution of how you work together, and then, how that team leader can shift. So in regards to helping me help you and kind of the seating philosophy, I think it's important to have that conversation with the person that you're with, the therapist, the LCMP, the doctor. What is your thoughts on the type of support and the amount of support you should give someone? People can have very heated, thoughts about custom molded seating. And, you know, what is the person that you're working with? What's their theory on that? You know, when and what should you do about recommending mobility equipment? You know, what does that therapist really define their functional ambulation as? If you're looking at someone who may be walking a little bit and then, you know, may have a history of falls, you know, are they very hard drawn in the line about what is ambulation in terms of not possibly qualifying for a chair? You know, what is their definition of functional and safe and independent mobility? It can vary from person to person that you're working with, and understanding where they're coming from with that philosophy. You know, does everybody get a MAT assessment? Does everybody trial equipment? Some therapists, even if they're replacing the same exact thing, still want to have them trial other things. You know, it's understanding where you're both coming from. You know, Linda and I were very much of the same philosophy in regards to custom molds, that we don't mold for a winter jacket. You know, we're not of the belief of giving everybody a lot of extra room in their mold for the 3 months a year they're wearing a jacket. We would talk about educating the families about ponchos and backwards jackets and things like that. And because we shared that same process of that.
And with seating philosophy, you know, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for this. That's not what this is about. I think it's really about understanding where each of you are coming from, being able to be on the same page, to have a unified front when you're being challenged by maybe the end user or the family. And I would imagine that, you know, as a supplier, Lisa would maybe have to understand that one therapist comes to the table with one thing and another therapist might come another way, but it does help when you're both on the same page.
And I think being open to having that conversation, you know, and being, again, you know, different scenarios in different settings. If it's a one-on-one situation, we always talk about all the team members, like, what does the speech therapist want? What does the OT want? Like, what is everybody's goal? And how then are we able to try to help come to the best solution at the end of that? And so
Exactly.
it helps to understand each other's philosophy and then also be able to talk through it.
For sure. So another thing that really helps with the process is to understand what everyone's roles, and know that there are a lot of people on the team and there are a lot of people who might be in the background that really support us. And so from the clinical roles that we have, I just wanted to touch base on the fact that I was the seating specialist. I usually performed the physical assessment. I made the final recommendations for equipment. And I finalized the letter of medical necessity. I had some deliverables, and that was a certain amount of evals per week. I had to complete a certain amount of letters per week, and I had to track them. My seating assistant, Peggy, would perform my needs assessment. She would, and that really helped free me up for some things. She would help arrange the demos based off my request. And I was fortunate that she could draft some of my letters. That was one of the ways I helped to save time. But my letters were I was the final person on that. And she did my follow-ups, and so that also helped to get more deliverables. She had to have a certain number of visits per week. She had to have letters completed within 2 weeks, although we seldom did. That is still one of the things that we really always worked on. I was fortunate enough at my clinic to have a technician, and Ray would be really good at doing these emergency repairs, troubleshooting power wheelchair issues, programming power wheelchairs. And what was great about having a technician is a lot of people would enter through the repair clinic, and he would pick up that there was other issues with seating or other things. So sometimes they entered through the repair clinic, and then we were able to make referrals. And his goal was to keep people in their wheelchairs. We wanted to minimize the amount of time they were without their wheelchair. I had an admin assist who was really excellent with, Debbie would process my referrals. So she would make sure they were legit and that we hadn't already had an appointment for this person or things like that. She would schedule that needs assessment or intake and all subsequent appointments. She processed the LMN insurance packet. So she would make sure that the letters were done, if they needed chart notes, If she needed, any other, prescriptions, FMEs, all that, she would get that together and then give it to the supplier. And she would verify the insurance before the appointments for the billing of my clinic appointments, not for verifying whether they qualified for, they had could have DME or anything. And her job was to have timely scheduling and submission. And our team was led by a physiatrist, and Dr. Janet was able to start that evaluation where she wrote the referral, complete the FME, and then always had to review my recommendations and sign off on those letters. And we always hoped that she would do timely visits and follow-ups.
So on the supplier end of things, I came from a smaller, when we first started working together, a smaller company where there were, I guess, not so many hands in the pot, so to speak. That has evolved over the years, and there's more people involved in the process, but they all also have their own definitive roles. All is equally as important in trying to move them through the process. So for myself, as the RTS, I coordinate demo equipment for the clinic, educate the families and the clinicians on insurance guidelines and reimbursement, and deliver, fit, and adjust the patient's mobility equipment. And my responsibility to the clinicians I work with is to make sure that I'm getting them their specs in a timely manner, that I'm moving through things as on my end as quickly as possible, that I'm responding to their questions about specs, timelines, insurance guidelines, and then working with the clinics to coordinate the deliveries. We have a seating technician who can at times assist with deliveries or make adjustments in the clinic setting or in the home setting, maybe after they've gotten a chair and they need a few things tweaked, and they're trained to do that, and working with the clinics to follow up on any programming if we need to. And we need to make sure that if we're going to ask a technician to do that, that they're efficient in understanding the types of repairs and programmings that we need to have done. The customer service rep on my end, for me, Monique, is an integral part of the process because she provides updates to the clients. She picks up the phone, she's scheduling repair, chairs returned back. She's working on following up with the clinic if certain evaluations were scheduled, and she needs to do that in a timely manner and is responsible for making sure she's scheduling a certain number of repairs and deliveries back to the clients every week. The funding specialist, who I think is such a important member of the team for both sides. In my case, my funding specialist, her name is Jessica. She verifies all of my insurance ahead of time so that we know going into the eval what our coverage criteria is. She is communicating with the clinics all the time about outstanding paperwork and how we're tracking that. She's submitting the completed package to the insurance company, the letters of medical necessity, the face-to-faces, all of that. And she's following up also with the doctor's offices. Linda and I, when we worked together, we were fortunate that the doctor was on site to do that paperwork. Other clinicians that I work with at other facilities, they're outside doctors. So we're taking on the responsibility of getting that back. It really helps to get things done. And she's following up, with the doctor's offices for the DPDs or the signed letters. And what we've evolved over time is, for my process, I ask my funding specialist twice a month, we send out a status update with all of the open orders and where things are at. We're waiting for the LMN from the therapist. We've sent it to the doctor. We've followed up with the doctor 3 times. We're waiting on the face-to-face notes. So we're constantly keeping a track of where our orders are and sharing that with the clinicians. Everybody's super busy. You might find that I send that off to my therapist and they're like, shoot, I have that done. I don't know why you don't have it. Maybe the fax didn't go through. Maybe it got scanned into the electronic medical record and didn't get sent over to us. So it just kind of helps keep things going. And she follows up with the clinicians on that. Like I said, twice a month. She follows up every 7 days with the doctor's office for documentation and is submitting, numerous orders per week to the insurance company. So they're definitely a huge part of this process, and I think sometimes not appreciated when we're just kind of talking quickly, but how integral they are to the process.
So I also think it's important that you have a good process defined. And this is some of the steps that we took. And you may find that you're combining some of them. There was a time when we had them, I had an appointment for everything, and then we started to combine. But I think it's just getting the idea of including these components. And that's getting that referral where your administration confirms it, doing a needs assessment, either before the appointment or virtually. I used my PT assistant to do that. That hands-on evaluation where you have standardized measures is from a clinical perspective. That feature match, can you hook up with your supplier or get your manufacturer to drop off demos? What do you have in your clinic to do equipment trials? And this is where the supplier might also check to make sure that the equipment fits in the home. Finalizing those equipment recommendations, using those other professionals, the family, and of course, considering funding. Submitting for your documentation. Again, our assistant drafted this and we used some templates. I just want to be clear that this cannot be written by the supplier. This is really on the clinical end. Although the supplier, in Lisa's case, she was very good at assisting us and with good language and making sure that if I wrote something, it may not get approved. How do you want to handle that? And we would modify our letters accordingly. Going with hopefully getting approval, but if not, being prepared to attend an appeal if that's something that's available to you. Ordering the equipment, but just kind of do a little quick check before you go ahead and order it. Make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be. That was a long process. An interim fit, usually I like that to be with the clinician and the supplier, not with the technician. I think the final fitting can go ahead and be with the technician, maybe at the home or after you're pretty well have established that this is what it's going to be and it's just a drop off. But I don't really like to use the technician at that point for my fine tune adjustments. And really important for us was a quick 4-week, maybe 4 to 6 week follow up after delivery. Make sure nothing changed in that right after delivery, and then either a 6-month or essentially a yearly follow-up where a lot of times that's where you picked up that there were changes and you had to start that process all over. In terms of outcome measures, I think that this, at the beginning, when I started this, I didn't really think much of it, but it really became really integral. I tracked everything. I had a big Access spreadsheet, and I would track the amount of time from referral to initial eval to order, to receiving the specs. How long did it take me to write the letter after the order? How long did it take for that letter to get submitted and approved? How long to get the delivery? I looked at approval and denial rates. This was great. Not great, but this helped me on a lot of things. It helped me provide clinical outcomes where what was good about it is I could then have a standard. This supplier does it this time. I could look at for where I could do improvements in my process. I had multiple suppliers and I could speak to one and say, you're not getting this paperwork done in a timely manner. It didn't include necessarily customer service or satisfaction surveys, but that's some of the other things that we did to measure outcomes.
So a big buzzword that we hear on the business side of things a lot is transaction cycle time. And I think that carries over to conversations we have with clinicians in our clinic at this point. We're tracking transaction cycle time from the moment the order starts to the moment the order is finished and when things are where we are in the process. Again, we are sending those bi-monthly reports to the facilities about outstanding paperwork. We're tracking approval and denial rates of equipment. We're monitoring trends. So it allows us to do a couple of things. It allows us to see if there is a bottleneck and where is that bottleneck occurring in that transaction cycle time. Business-wise, people love to say it's taking 120 days. Why is this one only taking 60 days? So we can compare how quickly insurance companies are approving things. Are there certain clinicians that take longer with their paperwork, and why is that? Do they need assistance from us in getting things back from the doctor? Where can we help in that process? So that allows us to see where hiccups may be and how we can help smooth them out. It also really, for the for the right now with when I say monitoring trends, we all deal with various insurance companies. We all see trends that are coming through in terms of certain maybe power positioning components being denied, or certain electronics being denied, or that sort of thing. And so by looking at our transaction cycle time and getting feedback from billing about what may be denied on the back end, we're able to then educate each other on what's happening. What is this particular insurance company looking for requirements for this particular item? This is what they're looking for. They want to see these 6 things. Does your patient meet those 6 requirements? And how they need to maybe, make sure that they're including certain things in their documentation. It may be that it's there, but it's not expanded enough on. We were talking earlier about forms versus narrative letters. There are some insurance companies that really are looking to see that everything is personalized, and why does that specific person need it? We can all say the justification for tilt is the justification for tilt, but where do they need to be, improving documentation? So that's really been something that I feel really strongly about. And I feel like I kind of push a lot, asking for that feedback back from our billing department in terms of, what's not getting paid for on the back end. It might have been prior authorized, or they didn't require prior approval. And then we find out at some point it didn't get covered. Well, why didn't it get covered? So that we can educate our families, our clinicians on how to advocate for themselves to get that piece of equipment or that component, covered for them, barring that it is required for them.
I just think that outcome measures is just really, it lends you for so much, improving your own process, giving standards to the people that you're working with, giving information up to your administration. I just think that as much as you can and monitor and measure of your process and your outcomes, it really just help to make that clinic work more efficiently. But we still know that we have barriers to our services, and this is because of the challenging environment that we have been working in for the past 20 years. That just continues to get more challenging. We have, for one, we talked about the poor history that we have. So what can you do? Can you send that intake home? Can you have it reviewed by an administrator beforehand? Can you use assistance? Can you do, how can you gather that information so your assessment's better? Transportation and frequent cancellations sort of come hand in hand, but we had a lot of transportation. So virtual was, we were starting to think virtually before the pandemic. We all know that that's kind of kicked up in the past 2 years. Frequent cancellations, virtual or home visits. So many times we think about bringing the client to us. Can we go to the client? Can we send someone to the house and then do a virtual, FaceTime visit? Frequently broken equipment. We had the luxury of a technician, but we also gathered loaner equipment. We recycled it. The technician would help do that. And so not having, if the wheelchair was broken, they couldn't get to their appointment. So it became like a little, kind of wheel that they were on. What happens when you and your supplier or, your 2 professionals really don't have the same seating philosophy? It's important to have a mutual understanding. You want to lead with the clinical recommendations, you want to negotiate based on funding, but it's important to kind of say, okay, this is where we agree on that, and really try to work through that philosophy. And at the very least, understand where each are coming from.
So the last movie in our marathon is A Marriage Story. And, how do you survive the 7-year itch, so to speak? And I think COVID has taught all of us a lot the last way too long, year three of COVID, in regards to personally how we deal with things, and professionally, and how our business and our clinical skills and our technical skills are evolving. And, Linda and I today talked a lot about this full clinic model where we had a technician, at UCP, and we have all of these players, and it's really an ideal situation. However, we also acknowledge that times are changing and resources are limited, time is limited. Understanding of what we do is not, well known. We talk about that all the time. What we do in the service that we provide and the best ways to provide it. And the model that we talked about, we were successful for many years like this. And even, Linda is now gone. She is in a different role. There's another therapist in the clinic, and then another, a doctor in the clinic. And even the clinic there, the model has changed. So we recognize that it's a fluid situation. And what we really hope is that what we talked about today, these basic principles about communication and working to work together for the best outcomes for our patients and staying true to the best clinical outcome and best independent and functional outcome for the patient is what you take away from this. And the roles of these people that we talked about on the team, how they're important and how you should try to think about utilizing them. So this process, in theory, how you modify it and how you take it away and use it for yourself. And make it successful for you, whether you're in an inpatient clinic or, an outpatient clinic, a school, you're a home care therapist, thinking about all of these components that we talked about and how to mold it into the process that works for you and makes you successful and gives your patients what they need. So, we're all surviving right now. And I think that's the best way to put it in so many different ways. And, we just kind of hope that some of the things that we talked about, you're able to put into practice with what you're doing.
Yeah, I think what's really important is to realize that the components can be there. They might be changed a little bit. Everything doesn't have to be in person. It could be through virtual. It could be that you combine things, and maybe other people take on different roles depending on the situation. It's just, I think, the components that you really want to include in your process.
Absolutely. So, we hope today, I don't know what the score is going to be for us on Rotten Tomatoes after the technical difficulties in the first half. I'm not so sure it's going to be great, but, we really hope that you can talk about and describe the roles of the people and around you and the members of the team in the clinic, or whether it's not a clinic, like we talked about, your team, your seating and mobility team. Some of the obstacles that we've talked about and how you can work to overcome them, and to take some of these ideas to modify and make your own program that's successful for you and the people that you work with.
And so we come to the end of our movie marathon. Are there any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda and Lisa. I know Lisa's been answering a few questions in the chat as we were going through, which is
she's more talented than me.
I'll try to read through and see if we've missed anything. I will say this is a really interesting presentation, and I think you guys really bring a useful perspective to it from the clinical side and the supplier/vendor side. I believe those two views aren't always looked at. It's usually one side or the other, and to have both expressed in a presentation, I think, is extremely helpful. So,
well, thank you, Vince.
That very well.
Yeah.
And one question that I'm going to throw out there is from a scheduling perspective. There's a lot of individuals in the team involved with these visits, either final fittings, assessments, etc. Have you met any barriers in scheduling and coordinating everybody together at the same time?
I think, I think the group home situation, developmentally disabled population, we have a lot of trouble getting everybody in. We have an appointment scheduled and they're not showing, they don't have staff. The staff that comes with them doesn't really know their history, and a family member can't get there. So I think we do have difficulties with that sort of situation where not necessarily all of our team members, but maybe the patient's team members, and we really need their input. It can be difficult at times to get that. And what I've found since COVID is that the use of Teams has really helped with that. I've got a pediatric clinic that I work in a school, and a parent may not be able to get off to come in for the full evaluation. And if they're comfortable, they'll Teams in with us so that they can give us their input. They can show us, or they don't have transportation to get in. Their child got in on the school bus, they can't get in, but we're able to coordinate. We have the speech therapist come into the room. We have the OT come into the room, and we Teams with the parent. They can talk to us about the home environment, what their needs are, what their transportation needs are. So it really has, I think thinking about using technology in that way has helped us decrease some of those barriers of getting people in and all the team members involved in the evaluation.
I was an administrator at the time as well, and 25%, we had a 25% no-show rate, which is extremely high and much higher than the industry, the healthcare industry. And I had tried to think of many ways to reduce that. Do you double book, take your chances that they don't both show up at the same time? And inevitably, when you did that, that's what would happen. So I think that that's why technology, I think, really is a great alternative to those, to that part of scheduling. And then also, do you schedule on the half hour? Do you schedule an hour? An hour is way out of our productivity requirements. So that was challenging as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that was very helpful, and hopefully telehealth sticks around permanently.
Sure.
We'll see. So reading down through, it looks like there is one question. It's from Barbara Kroom. I'm not sure if you answered it or not, Lisa. What system are you guys using to track the timelines?
So that's, like we said earlier, I work for NSM, so it really comes from our corporate mobility advisor system that they're able to track that and then break it down by each part of the process. So that comes from, I just kind of ask for that report and I can get it. I'm sure there's a way that I could pull it myself, but quite honestly, I'm not that tech savvy to do it. But it comes right from our system that the orders are entered in.
Wonderful.
I had,
just to let everybody know, I did add in the CEU code to the chat. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I had used Access way back 20 years ago. I started using Access, which I think is pretty, I don't know that anyone's using that anymore, but that was really a great way for me to do some high-end tracking. And I don't know what anyone's using now, but I think a lot of these project management programs for the clinical end would also be something that like a Monday.com or a ClickUp or some of those things, I think would be pretty helpful from the clinic point of view if you're not having a successful use of your EHR.
Wonderful. Next question here. How do electronic and digital signatures play into optimizing transaction cycle times?
So I did not embrace, again, very, very honestly, for a long time, did not embrace the electronic signature. I would get paper signatures and then I would have to scan it to the office, or I would have to send it over and for delivery, that sort of thing. For getting electronic signatures from the clinicians or the doctors, it definitely has helped speed things up. Because we're not waiting for things to come through on the mail, in the mail. Medicare will accept a virtual signature by the doctor. So it definitely has helped. And then in terms of the end, in terms of delivery paperwork, the electronic signature definitely helps because it gets it right in, gets things sent to the insurance company. There's no issue of possibly somebody's, if you're right at the tail end of somebody's insurance deadline, there's not an issue with it, not getting billed in time because you just didn't get the paperwork over to the office, that sort of thing.
Wonderful. And then it looks like we have another question here, down to roughly a minute left, so we'll try to get through them. So during COVID, we understand telehealth can be used for face-to-face evaluations. Is virtual ATP assessment acceptable?
So, yes, it was for Medicare. And other than that, then it varied by insurance. Like in New York, some of the long-term LTMCs, the long-term Medicare plans, did accept it. Some of them didn't. So it really depended upon who the payer was and what their acceptance of that was. And you know, and I saw that. If so, how was it even possible? So quite honestly, some of the evals I did, we knew the patient. Historically, we had history. So we knew kind of what their needs were. We went through what they had, what we were looking to change. And, you know, we then fine-tuned things later on. Medicare, yes, straight Medicare was accepting the ATP involvement virtually. And I think it's been extended, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
All right, so I think we're at our time.
Would you mind just stating the code out loud as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely, I can. So the CEU code is K0RCLV.
Awesome. If there's no other questions, we do have our industry resources that we love. Oops, can you see them?
Yep.
My chat just showed up. Sorry. And lastly, we also have these best practice resources and our references.
And I believe the slides are in the on the website, and our contact information is there as well.
Yeah, if I did it right, I uploaded it.
There you go. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your ISS.